Hi, welcome to iEducator. This is Teacher Jeff. I'm an educator and an engineer by profession. And today we will discuss Chapter 1. And Chapter 1 is all about the introduction to research. And in today's lesson, there are 7 key areas that I'm going to be highlighting today. First, we have the definition of research. Second, we will be tackling about the purposes of research, including its aims, objectives, and goals. Third, we have the characteristics of good research. Fourth, we have differences between research and problem solving. Fifth, we have kinds and classifications of research. Sixth, we have some hindrances to scientific inquiry. And finally, we have the scientific method of research. Now, take note that research is a key to progress, right? It's a key to progress because there can be no progress without research in almost, if not all, human endeavors. For example, in government, in education, in trade and commerce, and in all types and kinds of industries, research is very vital and essential. And so for that matter, the methods and techniques must be taught and learned in graduate as well as in undergraduate educational work. Now, this is imperative because the people who have gone through the college and graduate levels of education are the ones who are most expected to undertake research activities. Now, due to the reasons mentioned earlier, it is the purpose of this book to make the study of research methods and techniques, as well as thesis writing, easier, more practical and understandable, but comprehensive enough. So what is meant by research then? Well, actually, there are almost as many definitions of research as there are authors writing about the subject. Fortunately, the different definitions formulated by such authors have common elements. Samples of research definitions follow. Good, as you can see, Good defines research as a careful, critical, disciplined inquiry, varying in techniques and method according to the nature and conditions of the problem identified, directed toward the clarification or resolution or both of a problem. Now, Aquino has a more detailed definition of research. He says that research is simply the systematic search for pertinent information on a specific topic or problem. And after a careful, systematic search for a pertinent information or data on a specific topic or problem, and after the research worker has analyzed and interpreted the data, he eventually faces another essential task, that of preparing research report. Now, research has been defined as the process of information to solve a particular or specific problem in a scientific manner. That is according to Manuel and Medal. And according to Perel, he defined research as a systematic study or investigation of something for the purpose of answering questions posed by the researcher, cited by Sanchez. Trees and Trees commented that research, in its broadest sense, is an attempt to gain solutions to problems. More precisely, it is the collection of data in a rigorously controlled situation for the purpose of prediction and explanation. Now, formulated in a more comprehensive form, if we say research, research may be defined as a purposive, systematic, and scientific process of gathering, analyzing, classifying, organizing, presenting, and interpreting data for the solution of a problem, for prediction, for invention, for discovery of truth, or for the expansion of verification of existing knowledge, all for the preservation and improvement of the quality of our human lives. Now, the purposes of research, including its aims, objectives, and goals, well, the definition of research says that research is purposive. And the main or principal purpose and goal of research is the preservation and improvement of the quality of human life. Now, all kinds of research are directed toward this end. Now, the purpose of research is to serve man, and the goal of research is the good life. This is according to Good and Skates. Now, due to research, man has attained great accelerating progress and is enjoying the products of research, such as the fast and comfortable land, sea, and air means of transportation, the wonders of electricity, for example. And also we have the radio, the telephone, the air conditioning, light in our homes, movies and theaters. We also have running machinery for the industries, the computer, the potent drugs that promote health and prolong our lives, and many other countless things. Now, to satisfy man's craving for more understanding, to improve his judgment, to add his power, to reduce the burden of work, to relieve suffering, and to increase satisfactions in multitudinous ways, these are the large and fundamental goals of research. Now, for more specific purposes and goals of research, the following may be mentioned. First, we have to discover new facts about known phenomena. What do I mean about this? For example, alcohol is a known phenomenon, and research may turn it into a kind of fuel equal in quality to gasoline. And second, to find answers to problems which are only partially solved by existing methods and information. For example, cancer is a serious disease, right? Which is only partially cured by present methods, but due to intensive and continuous research, the disease may be eradicated later on. And third, we have improve existing techniques and develop new instruments or products. Now, this goal envisages the invention of, for example, new gadgets and machines, food products, and others used by men. And fourth, we have to discover previously unrecognized substances or elements. Well, previously we had only 92 elements, but due to research, we now have more than 100 elements. And fifth, discover pathways of action of known substances and elements. Now, due to research, we come to know the dangers from abusive use of unprescribed drugs and some poisonous substances. And six, to order related valid generalizations into systematized science. Now, the result of this purpose of research is actually the science we are now studying in school. And number seven, to provide basis for decision-making in business, industry, education, government, and in other undertakings. Now, take note that one approach in decision-making is actually the research approach. This is basing important decisions upon the result of the research. And number eight, to satisfy the researcher's curiosity. Remember, Edison was curious about how a hen hatches her eggs and made a research on that, and he invented the incubator. Okay, that is just one of the many examples under this specific purpose. And number nine, to find answers to queries by means of scientific methods. One important question in this particular purpose that may be asked, which can be answered only by means of research, is in what setting is life expectancy higher, in the city or in the barrio. Okay, so number 10, to acquire a better and deeper understanding about one phenomenon that can be known and understood better by research is why women are generally smaller than men. And number 11, to expand or verify existing knowledge. What do I mean by this? Well, this usually happens when researches are replicated. Newly discovered facts may be found to expand knowledge gained from a previous research or verified if the same facts are found. Now, in relation to purposes numbers 2 and 3, the following may be added to the list of purposes. So we have number 12, to improve educational practices for raising the quality of school products. Now remember, research surveys that we actually conduct often result in the revision of curricula and instructional innovations to maximize the effectiveness of the learning process. And number 13, to promote health and prolong life. Now, this purpose is very obviously demonstrated in pharmaceutical, nutritional, and in medical research. And number 14, to provide man with more of his basic needs, more and better food, clothing, shelter, etc. Now, the work of the International Rice Research Institute in Los Baños, Laguna, is a good example of this purpose. And finally, to make work, travel, and communication faster, easier, and more comfortable. Now, due to research, airplanes are made to fly faster, land vehicles to run faster, labor-saving machines have been invented and improved, radio and television brings news immediately to the remote areas, and more wonders of electricity are making life easier and better. Again, so these are the purposes of research, its aims, objectives, and the goal. What about the characteristics of a good research? Well, Crawford, from his definition, has given some characteristics of research as follows. He said, research is simply a systematic and refined technique of thinking, employing specialized tools, instruments, and procedures in order to obtain a more adequate solution of a problem that would be possible under ordinary means. Now, it starts with a problem, then collects data or facts, analyze these critically, and reaches decisions based on actual evidence. Okay, so these are usually the steps that we undergo if we conduct a research study. Now, it involves original work instead of a mere exercise of personal opinion. It evolves from a genuine desire to know rather than a desire to prove something, seeking to know not only what, but how much. And measurement is therefore a central feature of it. Now, another author by the name of Best gives a summary of the more important characteristics of a good research as follows. And first, he said, research gathers new knowledge or data from primary or first-hand sources. What do we mean by this? Now, in research and academics, a primary source refers to information collected from sources that witnessed or experienced an event firsthand. This can be historical documents, literary text or literary texts rather, artistic works, experiments, journal entries, surveys, and interviews. Okay, so it is not research. Remember, you have to take note that it is not research when one merely restates or merely reorganizes what is already known or what has been written. Because research places emphasis upon the discovery of the general principles. It means to say that it goes beyond the specific groups or situations investigated and by careful sampling procedure, infers qualities rather of the entire population from those observed in the smaller group. Second, research is expert, systematic, and accurate investigation. This means that the researcher knows what is already known about his problem. He proceeds from this point, carefully planning his procedures. Data are then gathered, recorded, and analyzed with as much accuracy as possible. He then uses such valid data gathering instruments as he can find or devise and employs mechanical means to improve on the accuracy of human observation, recording, and computation of data. And third, we have research is logical and objective, applying every possible tests to verify the data collected and the procedures employed. Now, in this characteristic, what the researcher usually do is that the researcher constantly strives to eliminate personal feeling and preferences. If we say eliminate personal feeling and preferences, he actually resists the temptation to seek only the data that support his hypothesis. There is no attempt to persuade or to prove. The emphasis is on testing rather than on proving the hypothesis. And the researcher elevates clear thinking and logic. He suppresses feeling and emotion in his analysis. And fourth characteristic, that would be research endeavors to organize data in quantitative terms, if possible, and express them as numerical measures. Now, what do I mean by this? It means to say that research is patient and unhurried, okay? So we need to take it slowly but surely. The researcher is actually willing to exert painstaking effort, suspending judgment to permit the data and logic to lead to a sound conclusion. He then realizes that significant findings do not actually come as a result of hurried and careless procedures. Research requires courage, meaning to say the researcher is willing to follow his procedures to conclusions that may be unpopular and bring social disapproval. And number 5 characteristic, that would be research is carefully recorded and reported, which is actually correct because every term is carefully defined, all procedures are described in detail, all limiting factors are recognized, all references are carefully documented, and all results are objectively recorded. And aside from that, all conclusions and generalizations are cautiously arrived at with due consideration for all of the limitations of methodology, data collected, and errors of human interpretation. Now, from these discussions, the characteristics of research may be summarized as follows. First, we can tell that research is systematic. Why systematic? Because, like I said earlier, it follows an orderly and sequential procedure that leads to the discovery of truth, solution of a problem, or whatever is aimed to be discovered. And aside from that, we can also tell that research is controlled. Why controlled? Because all variables except those that are tested or being experimented upon are kept constant or not allowed to change or vary, so that the changes made on the subjects of the study can be attributed only to experimental variable. This is especially true in an experimental research. And aside from that, we can also tell that research is empirical. It is empirical because all the procedures employed and the data gathered are actually perceived in the same manner by all observers. Meaning to say, for example, One says that there are 5 persons in the room. All agree to the existence of the 5 persons. However, if one says that there are 5 ghosts in the room, one or none at all may believe it because not all people believe in ghosts, right? Ghosts are examples of data that are not empirical. And number 4, we can also tell that research is analytical. It is analytical because there is actually a critical analysis of all the data used so that there is no error in their interpretation. And number 5, we can also tell that research is objective, unbiased, and logical. It is objective, unbiased, and logical because all the findings and conclusions are logically based on empirical data and no effort is made to alter the results of our research. And number 6, we can also tell that research employs hypothesis. Now, this is actually to guide the investigation process. That is why we make use of a hypothesis. For example, in experimental studies, hypotheses are expressly stated, but in descriptive studies, the specific sub-problems or specific questions serve as the hypothesis, and the hypotheses are tested and not proved. And for number 7, we can also tell that research employs quantitative or statistical methods. It employs quantitative and statistical methods because data are actually transformed into numerical measures and are treated statistically to determine their significance or usefulness. As you can recall in your, if you have done your own researches in the past, you can actually recall that in your research, in your statistical data or analysis, you make use of, for example, percentages. You have the mean or the weighted mean. Okay, so those are just some of the many examples of statistical methods or how you statistically collated all your data gathered. And for number 8, we can also tell that research is original work. It is original work because except in historical research, data are actually gathered from primary sources or first-hand sources, right? And not from secondary sources or usually printed materials such as books or thesis, etc. And for number 10, we can also tell that research is accurate investigation, observation, and description. In fact, every research activity must be done accurately so that the findings will lead to the formulation of scientific generalizations. All conclusions are based on the actual evidence. And for number 11, we can tell that research is patient and unhurried activity. Like I mentioned earlier, this is to ensure accuracy. Research that is hurriedly done or conducted carelessly due to racing against time may lead to shaky conclusions and generalizations. And for number 12, we can also tell that research requires an effort-making capacity. Remember, no research can be conducted without the exertion of much effort. Again, no one without any effort-making capacity can conduct a research because research involves much work and time. And finally, we can also tell that research requires courage. Like I said earlier, it requires courage because the researcher oftentimes undergo hazards, discomforts, and the like, especially with the advent of COVID-19 pandemic and you are doing your research again. So it is actually apparent that you are under a hazardous environment, right? Because it makes sense because it's actually pandemic right now. So That is why it's very courageous. And also, aside from having to undergo hazards and discomforts, at times the researchers also encounter public and social disapproval. And also, we have disagreements with colleagues may also arise. Okay, so what are the differences between research and problem solving then? Well, the researcher must be able to distinguish between research and problem solving. Why so? Because his supposed research problem may only be good for problem solving. And the differences between the two are summarized as follows. First, if we say research, there may not be a problem, only interest in answering a question or query. But if we say problem solving, there is always a problem to be solved. Again, that is one differences between a research and a problem solving. Another difference in research, a research problem is more rigorous and broader in scope. On the other hand, in problem solving, a problem to be solved is less rigorous and less broad. Okay? The next difference we have, the research problem is not necessarily defined specifically, but in problem solving side, the problem to be solved has to be defined specifically and identified definitely. Okay, so next we have all research is intended to solve some kind of problem, but this is not the primary aim. On the other hand, if we say problem solving does not always involve research. And number 5 difference, research is conducted not primarily to solve a problem, but to make a contribution to the general knowledge. But in problem solving, it is always intended to solve a problem. And the last difference, in research, it is actually concerned with broad problems, recurrent phenomena, and wide application through generalization. But if we say problem solving, it is actually concerned with a specific problem, and once the problem is actually solved, that is the end of it. Okay, so that's the differences between research and problem solving. Now, you have to take note as well that we have a couple kinds and classifications of research. Now, there are many kinds of research which are classified according to their distinctive features. Some of the classifications are, first, according to purpose. Second, we have according to goal. Third, we have according to levels of investigation. Fourth, we have according to the type of analysis. Fifth, we have according to scope. Sixth, we have according to choice of answers to problems. Seventh, we have according to statistical content. Eighth, we have according to time element. Again, so these are the different classifications and kinds of research. So in each kind, these are classified according to specific classifications. For the first kind of research, we have according to purpose. Now, under according to purpose, this is classified according to predictive or prognostic research, directive research, and illuminative research. So what do we mean by predictive or prognostic research then? If we say predictive or prognostic research, it has the purpose of determining the future operation of the variables under investigation with the aim of controlling or redirecting such for the better. For example, predictive research proposes to give the result from one specific educational practice or pattern and seeks to establish a close statistical connection between characteristics of students and a prediction of educational outcome. Again, all right? So under directive research, it determines what should be done based on the findings. So this is to remedy an unsatisfactory. This is actually to remedy an unsatisfactory condition if there is any. And finally, if we say illuminative research, it is actually concerned with the interaction of the components of the variable being investigated. As for example, interaction of the components of educational system and aims to show the connections among, for example, student characteristics, organizational patterns and policies, and educational consequence. And another kind of research, as mentioned earlier, we have according to goal. And this is classified further according to basic or pure research, and we also have applied research. If we say basic or pure research, it is done for the development of theories and principles. It is conducted for the intellectual pleasure of learning. Again, this is conducted for the intellectual pleasure of learning. Much of this kind of research has been done in psychology and sociology. On the other hand, if we say applied research, this is the application of the results of pure research. And so for that matter, this is testing the efficacy of theories and principles that we had applied in basic or pure research. For example, a principle says that praise reinforces learning. Now, to determine if this is true, one conducts an experiment in which there are two classes. In one class, he uses praise, but in the other class, there is no praise at all. All other things are kept equal. Now, at the end of the experimental period, he gives the same test to the two classes. If the scores of the pupils in the class with praise are significantly higher than those in the class without praise, then the principles are true. Okay? So for number 3, another kind of research that will be according to the levels of investigation. And this is further classified according to exploratory research, descriptive research, and experimental research. Well, in exploratory research, the researcher studies the variables pertinent to a specific situation. So there's something that you need or the researcher needs to explore. On the other hand, in descriptive research, the researcher studies the relationships of the variables. If variable A is having a relationship with variable B and so on and so forth. And in experimental research, the experimenter studies the effects of the variables on each other. Okay, so for the next kind of research, we have according to the type of analysis, and this is classified according to analytic approach and holistic approach. Now, in the analytic approach, the researcher attempts to identify and isolate the components of the research situation. On the other hand, in holistic approach, he begins with a total situation, focusing attention on the system first and then on its internal relationships. And also we have according to scope. Now, under this category is an action research. Again, under this category is action research. This type of research is done on a very limited scope to solve a particular problem, which is not so big. It is also important, or it is also problem solving. Now, in order for us to better understand this, For example, in education, it is a firing line or on-the-job type of problem solving or research used by teachers, supervisors, and administrators to improve the quality of their decisions and actions. It seeks more dependable and appropriate means of promoting and evaluating their pupils' growth in line with specific and general objectives and attempts to improve educational practices without reference to whether findings would be applicable beyond the group studied. And another kind of research that would be according to choice of answers to problems. Now, Ackoff divides research that is concerned with finding answers to problems into evaluation and developmental research. And if we say evaluation research, here, all possible courses of action are specified and identified, and the researcher tries to find the most advantageous. So you need to evaluate what's the most advantageous one. And in developmental research, the focus is actually on finding or developing a more suitable instrument or process that has been available. And another kind of research that would be according to statistical content, and under this type may be mentioned quantitative research and non-qualitative. Under this type may be mentioned quantitative research and non-quantitative research. If we say quantitative research or statistical research, this is one in which inferential statistics are utilized to determine the results of the study. Take note that inferential statistics such as correlation, chi-square, analysis of variance or ANOVA, etc., are being used to test the hypothesis. And this type of research usually includes comparison studies, cause and effect relationships, etc. On the other hand, if we say non-quantitative research, this is the type of research in which the use of quantity or statistics is practically null. This is especially true in anthropological studies where description is usually used. So merely you are just describing. Okay? It does not involve any numbers or numerical values. So descriptive data are gathered rather than quantitative data. And another kind of research we have according to time element. And according to time element, Best classifies research as historical, descriptive, and experimental. Historical, descriptive, and experimental are the three major research methods. All other methods, kinds, and types of research, whatever, they are called fall under these three major methods. Now, other types and kinds of research are named according to the area or field of activity. Hence, we have sociological research, social research, psychological research, anthropological research, physical research, chemical research, industrial research, economics research, health research, nursing research, curriculum research, educational research, and countless others. Okay, so these are the kinds and classifications of researches. If we conduct a research study, we cannot deny the fact that there are some hindrances that we normally encounter. One of these hindrances that would be tradition. If we say tradition, this is accepting that customs, beliefs, practices, and superstitions are true and are parts of the daily lives of men. So, for example, no effort is exerted to find out whether they are true or not. Now, in order for us to better understand this, let me give you a specific example. So, for instance, there is a traditional belief among some women that women who are conceiving should avoid eating dark or black food, such as blackberries, because their children will become dark as well. Now, this may be true or not, but many women believe and practice it without verifying its truth. People have the idea that when everybody does a thing, it is true. So, therefore, this belief is a hindrance to scientific investigation. Another hindrance to scientific inquiry, that would be authority. If we say authority, this is accepting without question an opinion about a certain subject which is given by someone who is considered an authority on the subject. So, in order for us to better understand this, let me have an example. So, for example, if an ordinary person says that kissing transmits colds, he is not believed much and he may even be laughed at, right? On the other hand, when a doctor says the same thing, he is believed without question. Supposing a doctor commits a mistake, and it is a fact that some doctors commit mistakes sometimes, right? Worse, sometimes persons with big names in the community make pronouncements about things outside their own expertise, and they are believed because of their big names. They are believed without any scientific inquiry about the truth of their pronouncements. For instance, a well known athlete is made to announce that to drink a certain brand of liquor is good because it makes the body strong. Big stars in the movies are often made to sponsor the sale of certain products, especially beauty enhancing things or articles, and they are believed without the slightest semblance of any scientific investigation. And another hindrance to scientific investigation, we call that as inaccurate observation. This is describing wrongly what is actually observed. For example, in the dead of a moonlight night, a man sees a shadow in the form of a person, and the man concludes at once, without any investigation, that he has seen a ghost. When a meteor strikes the atmosphere, people who see it say they have seen a flying saucer. When one sees a man lying unconscious in the street after he is hit by a speeding car, he concludes at once that the person is already dead, even if he is not. So he does not investigate anymore. And another hindrance to scientific inquiry, that would be called overgeneralization. If we say overgeneralization, this is establishing a pattern out of a few instances. For example, when one sees one or two Ilocano husbands who are hardworking, responsible, and trustworthy, then he concludes that Ilocano husbands are hardworking, responsible, and trustworthy. When one happens to travel in a rough road in a certain province, he forms the impressions that the roads in that province are rough. He does not take the pains anymore to see if the other roads in the province are also rough. So that is what we call overgeneralization. And another hindrance, that would be selective observation. This is persisting to believe an observed pattern from an overgeneralization and ignoring other pertinent patterns. For example, one sees for the first time one or two prosperous Chinese stores beside a poor, struggling Filipino store. He forms the conclusion that the Chinese are more shrewd and more competitive than Filipinos. So, whenever he sees Chinese and Filipino stores, he always has that idea that Chinese are better businessmen than Filipinos, ignoring the fact that there are also poor Chinese businessmen and they are also very good and more competitive Filipino businessmen. So that's what we call selective observation. Another hindrance to scientific inquiry that would be called made up information. If we say made up information, this is making up information to explain away confusion. So supposing a buyer buys from a store and that buyer buys goods worth 50 pesos and gives to the storekeeper a 100 peso bill. Now, the storekeeper mistakenly gives a change of 40 pesos. The buyer goes away without counting the change, but when he gets home, he finds that the change is short of 10 pesos. Now, instead of going back to the store to find out why he has a wrong change, he concludes that the storekeeper is a cheater and the members of his family are also cheaters. Then he buys again from the store, but accidentally leaves his wallet when he is paying for the goods. Now, a son of the storekeeper goes to the buyer's house, returning the wallet. So instead of thinking that, after all, the storekeeper is an honest fellow and perhaps also his family members, so he imagines that maybe the boy went to his house purposely not to return the wallet, but to see his house for a possible burglary. So another example of made up information is wrongly interpreting the findings of a research material. And another hindrance to scientific inquiry, we call that as illogical reasoning. And if we say illogical reasoning, this is attributing something to another without any logical basis. For example, because of the extended good weather, it may rain at the weekend, or because it is sunny, it will not rain that day. Or when a woman is believed to be a sorcerer. These are beliefs without any logical basis, and no effort is exerted to verify them. And another hindrance that would be ego involvement in understanding. So, what do we mean by this? If we say ego involvement in understanding, this is actually giving an explanation when one finds himself in an unfavorable situation. For example, when foreigners make a slur on Filipinos, the latter counter that. That is racial discrimination without investigating whether the slight is true or not. Now, when a student gets a low grade, he says that he got a low grade because his teacher has a personal grudge against him and he is a victim of vindictiveness. He does not make any effort to examine his abilities, his habits of study, etc. Okay, so that's an example of ego involvement in understanding. Another hindrance to scientific inquiry that would be called mystification. If we say mystification, this is attributing to supernatural power the phenomena that cannot be understood. So this is accepting that there are things which are beyond human intelligence to understand and which are reserved only to a supernatural being. And therefore, no effort is exerted to make a scientific inquiry about these phenomena. And another that would be to err is human. This is an attitude that admits the fallibility of man. So when a man renders a wrong decision or commits a mistake, he merely leans on the saying, to err is human. So he does not make any effort anymore to study why he committed the error, how he committed the error, the implications of his error, how he can correct his error, and how to make more sound decisions in the future. And finally, the last hindrance to scientific inquiry is called dogmatism. If we say dogmatism, this is actually an addition. This is an unwritten policy of certain institutions and governments prohibiting the study of topics that are believed to run counter to the established doctrines of some institutions or governments. And so, for that matter, in communistic states, it is unlikely that one studies and writes about the beauty of democracy. The same is true in a democracy. There is a veiled prohibition to study and write about the beauty and adoption of communism. It may be a remote possibility that a research student in a Christian church related school can make a study about the non-existence of God, right? Which makes sense. It is unlikely also that one advocates the adoption of polygamy in a Christian community because his study findings say that polygamy is good. Now, these examples are some hindrances to scientific investigation. So, moving on to our next key area, that would be the scientific method of research. Now, one of the characteristics of a good research is that it is systematic. It follows the scientific method of research, which includes the following sequential steps. So, if we say scientific, meaning to say we follow a step-by-step process or procedure, and it is based on factual information. So the first step, that would be determining or recognizing the problem. Second, we have forming a hypothesis, and after having formed our hypothesis, that would be time for us to do the library search. And after doing the library search, that's going to be time for us to design our study. And after designing the study, that will be developing the instruments for collecting data, or our research instruments. And after developing our research instruments, then it is time for us to collect our data. So remember that there are actually a couple ways in collecting the data. It can be through observation, waste walking. You can also collect data by means of interviews. Okay, so it can be a written interview or a personal interview or a direct interview to your respondents. And after collecting your data, it is now time for us to analyze our data. So in analyzing our data, we can have our data analyzed by means of graphical presentation. Okay, so there are a lot of ways in analyzing our data. Next, we have determining implications and conclusions from the findings. And finally, making recommendations for further research. Now, based on these sequential steps in the scientific method of a research study, it should be borne in mind as well that the researcher goes through all the 9 steps when he does his research and when he writes his research report. Now, if the standard format of thesis writing is followed, the first 2 steps will be included in chapter 1, the problem and its setting. The third step will be in chapter 2, or related literature and studies. The fourth, fifth, and sixth steps will be discussed in chapter 3, methods of research and procedures. The seventh step will be presented in chapter 4, analysis, presentation, and interpretation of data. And the last 2 steps placed in chapter 5, summary, conclusion, and recommendations. Now, principles of the scientific method. So we have rigid control, we have We also have objectivity principle. We have systematic organization. And finally, we have rigorous standards. Now, what do we mean by rigid control? If we say rigid control, it actually refers to the manipulation of the research variables. Remember, variables are those things that vary in quantity and quality, which are to be manipulated by the researcher. Examples of variables are age, sex, population, adequacy, efficiency, etc. So there are variables which should be controlled rigidly, that is kept constant or equal in a certain research work. On the other hand, if we say objectivity, it means that there should be no bias or partially in treating, or partiality rather, in treating the results of the inquiry. And so for that matter, the results should not be tampered with, whatever they may be. And another principle of scientific method is what we call systematic organization. And if we say systematic organization, this refers to proper and accurate tabulation of data, as well as presenting them in statistical tables ready for interpretation. And aside from statistical tables, another way in presenting the data, that would be graphical presentation. Okay, so tabulation, and there are so many ways in presenting our data. And lastly, the fourth principle is what we call rigorous standard. So this principle refers to the setting, or to the setting up of standards or principles which serve as basis for evaluating the findings of a study. Such standards should not be changed to suit the expectations of the researcher. And the principle also refers to the accurate statistical computation and interpretation of quantified data. In other words, if you have statistical computation, it should be true and correct. Okay, so your computation should be correctly computed. So it should be noted that the development of this book follows the sequential steps of the scientific method of research. All right, I think that's a good place to stop. If you have questions, please let me know on the comment section below. And if you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button for the latest updates. Thank you.